So, as we're a legal deposit library, we have an enormous collection of Victorian songs and music published in the UK and Ireland. There's probably over 120,000 items from this period alone. Not every song that was published made it here, but the vast majority did. Popular music is extraordinarily important, not just in showing what people enjoyed musically back in the day, it also provides a snapshot of what was popular generally and what were the interests of wider Victorian society. So, for example, in our collections, we find songs about sport and relationships, not just between people, but between countries and across political divides. We find music celebrating exploration and heroism and the latest fashion and events. The lady on the right is celebrating the founding of the Red Cross. And of course, food and drink feature largely. We're going to start with a song that predates the Victorian period by quite some time. The words to the roast beef of Old England were written by Henry Fielding, who wrote the novel Tom Jones and founded an early form of the police force, the Bow Street Runners. The music was written by Richard Leveridge and it was first performed with words and tune united around 1735, a whole century before Victoria ascended the throne. This picture is Hogarth's The Gate of Calais, which is also known as the roast beef of Old England, and was painted in 1748. Hogarth had nearly been arrested as a spy while sketching near the defences of Calais. You can just see him in profile here on the left-hand side, and he painted this on his return home. Roast beef had become so connected with British identity that the common French slang for Brits was les roast beefs. This is a Victorian arrangement of the song. Take it away, Will.
Alas, those dear old days are gone, ne'er to return again. Those festive days when we all sang out with might and main. Oh, mighty roast beef is an Englishman's food. It ennobles our veins and enriches our blood. Our soldiers are brave and our sailors are good. Oh, the roast beef of old England, and oh, the old English roast beef.
This is the cover of the version you just heard. You can see a group of people sitting down to a feast in the bottom right-hand corner. This arrangement also includes some other Victorian favourites such as Old Lang Syne and Home Sweet Home. Now, although roast beef was an old song, it continued to be very popular. During the Victorian period, supper clubs would often close an evening with song. The last item was invariably God Save the Queen, but often immediately before that, the roast beef of Old England would be sung as a sort of homage to food, even if sometimes it was incredibly inappropriate. There's a wonderful story of a member of a vegetarian society being put on the spot at a dinner and asked to sing unexpectedly. It was only natural that he burst into a chorus of the roast beef of Old England, only to subside into an abashed silence. Vegetarianism started to become popular in Victorian times. As today, people came to it for many different reasons: health, religion, and politics, to name just three. Some combined it with temperance, and there'll be more on that shortly. Later in the era, it became popular among the upwardly mobile and those who thought it might be a more cost-effective way of feeding a growing population, many of whom were living at subsistence level. But even at its most popular, there were probably only around 7,000 vegetarians in the UK during the Victorian era. Allied to the vegetarians were the fruitarians, who were a sort of extreme vegan, eating fruit, nuts, and seeds, but little else. But the Victorian era could be an age of extremes, for alongside these thrifty diets and the notorious poverty of some members of society, food and drink was also consumed to excess. With improved transport links and the growth of the British Empire, food and drink arrived from all over the world. Indeed, even nationally, transport made a difference, hence the growing popularity of what would become a British institution, the fish and chip shop. With the end of what had seemed an almost perpetual war with France, with the close of the Napoleonic Wars, French alcohol arrived legally on the British market. It had been arriving via the costly and illegal route of smuggling, but now it became legal, more easily obtainable, and I suspect cheaper, and the party started. Champagne, especially, had a stunning success rate in the 19th century, going from selling around 700,000 bottles worldwide at the start of the century to 20 million by 1850. The champagne of the time was generally much sweeter than today's drink, but a decision was made in 1846 to sell a drier version to the United Kingdom, and that did really well. In fact, the popularity of the new taste led to brut champagne being designed specifically for the British market later in the century. In 1876, George Laybourne, a notable musical performer and songwriter who you can see here, created his most successful song and character, Champagne Charlie. In fact, the song was so successful that we don't have a copy here at the UL, and this is usually a sure sign that the song sold faster than the publishers were able to supply the legal deposit libraries. Following on from Champagne Charlie, Laybourne, yes, it's him again, continued to write champagne-related songs. Champagne Charlie was also the nickname of the champagne producer Charles Heidsieck, who was the first to export champagne to America. So perhaps to make sure that he was even-handed, Laybourne created this little number in praise of Moet and Chandon. Back to Will for an extract.
Champagne Charlie was my name, champagne drinking gained my fame. So as of old when on the spree, Moet and Chandon's the wine for me.
This started a whole string of drink-related songs, including appropriately the more generalised Champagne, again courtesy of George Laybourne. Here's an excerpt.
Since Champagne Charlie first began to sing in plays of sparkling wine, by turns my fickle fancy ran to every produce of the vine. From Burgundy to light Moselle, each brand inspired my voice and brain, but still I can't resist the spell that clings to my first love, champagne. Champagne, see it sparkling, winking and beaming, fizzing and creaming. Champagne, nectar of nectars, give me a bumper of bright champagne.
These type of songs around drink brands became very popular. It's not just Coca-Cola who've been able to market successfully with music. There was even a song which has proved to be remarkably elusive about Bovril. Although no one except the vegetarians was going to make a complaint about Bovril, there was a serious side to the easy availability of alcohol generally. The Temperance Society was concerned with the growth of drinking and alcoholism, particularly among the working class, especially with the increase of violence and poverty that often resulted from it. Related to this, around the time that vegetarianism was taking off in Manchester, the Band of Hope was founded in the United Kingdom. It was aimed specifically at young people and introduced activities, most notably music, in which they could join, all of which were intended to steer them away from drinking. This particular banner was created for a Baptist chapel in Portsmouth in the early years of the 20th century. As part of the Band of Hope activities and to attract a wider audience, the Temperance Society published songs, some serious, some comical. Please Sell No More Drink to My Father, sung here by Emily and friends, was, I think, intended to be rather more serious.
so strange and so wild. Heed the prayer of my heartbroken mother, and pity the poor drunkard's child.
When somebody loves us so dearly, no father is kinder than he. He wishes so much to stop drinking, but this is the trouble, you see. He cannot withstand the temptation he feels when he passes your door. As he goes to his work in the morning, please promise to sell him no more.
Please sell no more drink to my father. It makes him so strange and so wild. Heed the prayer of my heartbroken mother, and pity the poor drunkard's child. Please sell no more drink to my father. It makes him so strange and so wild. Heed the prayer of my heartbroken mother, and pity the poor drunkard's child.
Drink wasn't the only problem. In contrast to those who didn't have enough to eat, for some the problem was too much food, as you can see here. The gentleman in question is E. Giovanelli, a conductor and impresario to whom this set of quadrilles was dedicated. Giovanelli ran a concert venue, Highbury Barn. As well as music, the venue featured a tightrope act in which a young woman, the female blondin, would cross the rope with her head in a sack. No, I'm not joking, while fireworks were blazing at both ends of the rope. On one occasion, this led to a very nasty fall, and she was lucky not to be killed. Jules Leotard, the inspiration for the daring young man on the flying trapeze, another song written and sung by George Leybourne, who we met earlier, was on the bill too. And he also fell after a helpful member of the audience mentioned the earlier accident. Kind-hearted Giovanelli ran a benefit for his injured artistes. Giovanelli also rose to fame when he tried out one of the first fashionable diets, the Banting diet. On this cover, you can just see at the bottom right-hand corner a slim, blonde conductor creeping out of the venue. This is presumably Giovanelli after his Banting diet, looking a lot fitter and having apparently changed hair colour too. So who was Banting who created this popular diet? Well, slightly alarmingly, he wasn't a doctor or a dietitian or indeed anyone with any particular expertise in food. So not much has changed when you think about some of the diet fads and fashions that still exist today. His day job was actually as a funeral director. The Banting diet was one of the earliest slimming celebrity diets and was based on low carbohydrate and sugar intake and high fat intake. It became wildly popular and became so well known that slimming was even referred to colloquially as banting. Its popularity continued well into the 20th century. Indeed, you can even find instructions on how to follow the diet on the internet today. The most recent I found was on the BBC's Good Food Guide, dated January this year. The Victorian period to the 1920s was its heyday, though, and it even got a mention in an Agatha Christie short story in the anthology The 13 Problems, which was Miss Marple's first outing. This is my own copy from the 1970s. I won't read you the section where it's mentioned, as it would be a massive spoiler, but do read the Tuesday Night Club if you want to know more. Back to Mr. Giovanelli and the Banting quadrille. Quadrilles are a set of dances, usually with varying times and occasionally speeds, though generally they're on the quicker side. They could be played by a solo instrument such as the piano, or could include other instruments, or even be played by a band. Besides dancing, they can also be used as a background for parlour games, especially for ones such as musical chairs, which require music. What is most unusual about this particular set of quadrilles is that they include a singer, a faux Giovanelli, musing on his life before and after the Banting Diet. This particular set of quadrilles appears to be a bit of a mixture of dance, comedy, and parlour games, and I'm not entirely sure as to why it was written. Could it even have been an elaborate marketing campaign? Here's Will and myself before and after his diet with a selection from the Banting Quadrille.
It's very well for you to stare at my enormous figure. Unless I take to Banting's plan, I surely shall get bigger. Forsaking all good things will cause me great dejection. I soon shall get as thin as Pepper's ghost reflection. Ho, ho! Ho, ho! Ho, ho! Now Banting system you can see tried on me. Now of flesh I'm almost free, don't you see? Should I get so fat again, it down must come by Banting's plan. 'Tis the only way, you see. if you wish to slender be.
Unlike the drinkers of champagne and Moet and Chandon, or the diet that made Giovanelli turn to Banting, there was also terrible poverty in the UK during the Victorian period. The slums of the urban poor were widely written about. What was less commonly acknowledged was rural poverty, which was also very real. The one time, however, when farm labourers could really enjoy themselves was at harvest time. For most farmhands, the hard work leading up to harvest was forgotten when all was safely gathered in and harvest supper celebrations could commence. Through the 20th century, Harvest Festival gradually moved away from the land and into the church, where a harvest service on the Sunday was often followed by parish celebrations, usually featuring a meal, music, and fundraising later in the week. And back in Victorian times, the celebrations themselves, at least in rural areas, took place on the farm where the harvesters worked. This is a really interesting song with an East Anglian connection. It was collected by Ella Rider Haggard, who is the mother of H. Rider Haggard, who some of you will have heard of. He was a very popular novelist in the early 20th century, best known for King Solomon's Mines and She, both of which were filmed. The Rider Haggards were landowners in West Bradenham in Norfolk, now simply known as Bradenham, and the family home was at Bradenham Hall, which, as you can see from this website, can still be visited today. Ella Rider Haggard collected the tune, which was a favourite of Bradenham Harvest Suppers, and probably paid to have it published in 1864. It's unusual in that it is probably one of the earliest folk songs to be collected by a woman. Also unusual is the level of care and detail that Ella uses in describing the song, its usage, the customs associated with it, and its possible origins. Ella describes it thus. The harvest supper in Norfolk and Suffolk is marked by some curious traditional observances, among which is the peculiar manner of drinking the health of the master and mistress. Supper being ended, a fresh supply of beer is called for, and the mug being filled and presented to one of the party, all stand up, and with the exception of the drinker, begin singing the harvest song. The person holding the mug is not to taste the contents till desired in the second part of the tune to drink half his beer, when he does so, and on the repetition of the air, he swallows the remainder, the last note being prolonged to enable him to do so. The mug is then passed on, and the song begins afresh till all have drunk, when the whole is repeated to celebrate the health of the mistress in like manner. When the labourers are numerous, the ceremony is a very lengthy one, and it is generally terminated, if the master's family be present, by the still more quaint and ancient custom of crying largesse, to do which all the party join hands and stand in a circle. The chief labourer, styled the Lord, standing alone and blowing a horn in the centre, to the sound of which they all sing the word largesse 3 times, throwing their hands up in the air while the first note is sustained and lowering them at the second. A subscription from the master's family to provide tea for the wives and children of the labourers generally answers this appeal. Persons acquainted with Norfolk and Suffolk will recognise the description of this ancient custom, as it is commonly practised in the fields by the labourers and gleaners during the harvest season to obtain a donation from the passing or intruding stranger. I love that phrase. From the Norman word used, it might be supposed to date from feudal times, but the author has been informed that a similar custom prevails in Devonshire and Cornwall, the word sung being there a Celtic one, so that it probably has a much earlier origin. The following characteristic air, which probably dates from the days of Queen Elizabeth, if not earlier, is sung to the words of the harvest song in the village of West Bradenham in Norfolk, and has been noted down to preserve it from fading into oblivion. The composer believing that it is the duty of all interested in the welfare of our English peasantry to encourage and maintain to the utmost the surviving relics of those few and hardly earned opportunities of domestic and social gathering that yet linger among them, to reward and enliven their daily and incessant toil. So let's raise a glass to the Norfolk harvesters.
Here's the master's good health, boys. He's the finder of the feast. God bless his industry and send him increase. And send him good crops, boys, we may reap another year. Here's the master's good health, boys, so drink off your beer. And send in good crops, boys, we may reap another year. Here's your master's good health, boys, so drink off your beer.
Here's the mistress, good health, boys. She's the giver of the feast. God bless her industry and send her increase. For she is a good woman, she provides us good cheer. Here's the mistress, good health, boys, so drink off your beer.
For she is a good woman, she provides us good cheer. Here's your mistress, good health, boys, so drink off your beer. Here's the labourer's good health, boys, he has worked for us well. As now 'tis all garnered, our harvest will tell. We'll be thankful to God, boys, who provides us good cheer. Here's the labourer's good health, boys, so drink off your beer. We'll be thankful to God, boys, who provides us good cheer. He's the labourer's good health, boys, so drink off your beer.
Oops, go back one. And so on to our last song, and a selection of music for use at a harvest supper. They're not just for voice and piano either. This particular edition also features a part for a brass instrument, but I suspect that any instrumentalist was very welcome to join in. We have our clarinetist, Sarah, here. Sorry, that doesn't do what I was expecting to do. The Harvest Quadrilles are an interesting collection as most of the music is not directly connected to the season. Oh, hang on. Sorry about this, folks. It's suddenly going in the wrong direction. This is very weird. That's better. So, on to our last song and a selection of music for use at a harvest supper. They're not just for voice and piano either. This particular edition also features a part for a brass instrument, but I suspect that any instrumentalist was very welcome to join in, so my colleague Sarah is on clarinet here. The Harvest Quadrilles are an interesting collection as most of the music is not directly connected to the season, but is more suggestive of a structure to the event, not dissimilar to what might happen at a Victorian Christmas party. So there are popular songs in which everyone can join in, instrumental numbers for dancing, games, or just to relax and listen, and more. So let's work our way through the event, opening with a song of appreciation to the supplier of the feast.
A health unto our Master, the founder of the feast. I hope his soul, whene'er he dies in heaven, will find peace. So drink, boys, drink, and see you do not spill. For if you do, you shall drink too. It is our Master's will. So drink, boys, drink, and see you do not spill. For if you do, you shall drink too.
staple of the feast would appear to be a ghost story or a blood-curdling tale. So next on the menu is the old woman's song, also known as the murdered child. Emily's only singing a verse here, as the rest of the story is extremely gruesome. You can find it if you Google it. It's based on a true story, which oddly enough has a local connection, as it happened not that far from here, at West Mill, near Buntingford.
You tender parents all around, come listen unto me. While I unfold and murder cold that awful tragedy. Near Buntingford in Hertfordshire, in a village called West Mill, this sad inhuman murder will cause your blood to chill.
You'll notice on the cover that there seems to be a link to Ella Rider Haggard's description of the Harvest Supper, as the workers here appear to be crying largesse to a man who I assume is the owner of the farm, the older gentleman in blue to the right of the picture. Following on from the murderous tale, let's get back to some jollity, an instrumental number, perhaps time for some dancing. Here's the Reaper's Song, not the famous version by Gluck, but a Victorian harvest celebration. And we're on the home stretch. The feast has been eaten, the drink has been drunk. We've had ghoulish stories, merry songs, and dancing. Now for a few rousing choruses before the harvesters head home. At least one of the tunes will be familiar.
Sportsman, as every man should be. A hunted life of the country life, it does the life for me. Our horses and the hounds and such no other kind can show. Though 'tis their delight in the forest fight, with the flocks afoot to show. We won't go home till morning. We won't go home till morning. We won't go home till morning. Till daylight doth appear. Till daylight doth appear.
I hope you enjoyed this look at food and drink via the prism of Victorian music. Many thanks to Emily, Will, and Sarah for their help with the music, and thanks to Sarah too for this view of the UL. Now it's back to Francesca for any questions. If there's anything you want to ask but don't want to ask now, please feel free to email me.